My parents moved into my house, and when my older sister joined, she requested the master bedroom and half of the house's space. That's when I decided to kick them all out. I'm a 26-year-old man living with my parents in a home that I fully pay for. It might sound straightforward, but the reality is a lot more complicated. Let me start from the beginning. Last year I bought a house in the city. I covered the mortgage, all the bills, groceries, everything. My parents, Liz 52F and Tom 55M, both retired teachers, don't contribute a cent. It wasn't a situation where I moved back home because I couldn't afford rent. Actually, I earn a good salary as a software engineer, and I wanted to be closer to job opportunities in the city. Plus, I thought it would be nice to support them after they spent years taking care of me. It's a comfortable 3-bedroom house, nothing flashy, but it's cozy, with a backyard and a large living room. Since I handle all the expenses, I took the master bedroom. It has a walk-in closet and an attached bathroom, which is perfect since I dislike sharing a bathroom. The second bedroom serves as my home office, as I work remotely about 80% of the time, so I've set it up with dual monitors, a comfy chair, and everything I need. The third bedroom is reserved as a guest room for when family visits. Initially, everything went smoothly. My parents enjoyed living in the city and kept to themselves while I managed the house and my work. I didn't mind covering the expenses because, after all, they're my parents, and I liked the idea of giving back after all they did for me. But then things took a turn. One morning over breakfast, my mom casually dropped a bombshell. She mentioned that my older sister, Jessica 28F, and her husband, Eric 26M, were considering a move to the city. Eric is expecting a baby, and apparently they've been struggling financially so they could use some support. At first I didn't think much of it. Jessica and Eric have a history of moving from one difficult situation to the next. I figured if they relocated, they'd find a small apartment nearby. But that's when things took a turn I wasn't ready for. A few days later, my mom sat me down, using her best innocent voice, and revealed that they had already invited Jessica and Eric to stay with us just for a little while, until they got back on their feet. They didn't ask me if I was okay with it. They informed me after the fact. I was still trying to wrap my head around the situation when Jessica and Eric showed up at the door with their bags, clearly planning to stay for the long haul. Jessica and Eric moved in, and it quickly became clear that they had no intention of leaving anytime soon. I was already stressed thinking about the extra expenses I'd be covering. I was still paying for everything: groceries, utilities, the mortgage, and now I had 2 more people to support, with no one asking how I felt about it. I love my sister, but Jessica isn't exactly known for being responsible. She often ends up in tough situations, and it's usually others who have to bail her out. Eric is polite enough, but he carries this sense of entitlement that irritates me, like the world owes him something just because he's expecting a baby. Tension started building almost immediately. Just days after they moved in, Eric began making these offhand comments, the kind that sound innocent but are actually irritating. He'd say things like, "This place is huge, it must be tough to clean all by yourself." Or, "We'll need a lot of room for baby stuff when it arrives." At first, I tried to brush it off, but then things escalated. One evening, Jessica and Eric pulled me aside, saying they needed to talk. I thought maybe they'd apologize for being an extra burden or offer to contribute financially. But no, Eric, sounding casual, said, "We've been thinking it'd make more sense if we took the master bedroom." I blinked, thinking I must have misheard, but then Jessica added, "Yeah, the baby's going to need a lot of space, and your room has the walk-in closet and private bathroom." Let me remind you, I pay the mortgage, I pay for everything, and here they were, suggesting that I give up my own room for them and their unborn child. The audacity hit me like a ton of bricks. I managed to stay calm and said, "Why don't you just take the guest room?" "It's pretty spacious." Eric looked at me like I'd said something absurd and replied, "That room doesn't have a walk-in closet. The baby needs space." Things quickly spiraled downhill. Within days, Jessica and Eric were making themselves more than comfortable, leaving their belongings scattered around the house, like shoes left by the couch and baby magazines spread across the dining table. Eric even started talking about where he'd put the crib, as if they'd already claimed the master bedroom. One day I had to go into the office for a meeting, and when I got home I was furious. My clothes, computer monitor, and other personal belongings were piled up in the hallway. I stormed into the master bedroom, only to find Eric nonchalantly packing up the last of my things, as if it were no big deal. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. He didn't even flinch. "Your mom said we could start moving in here. The baby's coming soon and we need the space." I was livid. "I told you, you're not taking my room," I shot back. Eric crossed his arms and insisted, "The guest room is too small," but I wasn't backing down. "I don't care, you're not taking my room. It's either the guest room or you find another place to live. Eric was visibly upset, but I didn't care. I left the room, grabbed my phone, and called my mom, who wasn't home at the time. "Mom, did you tell Jessica and Eric they could move into my room?" I asked. There was a long pause before she finally admitted, "Well, I thought it would be the best solution. They need the space, and you already have the office. It's not like you're using the master bedroom for much." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? I pay the mortgage. I cover the bills. And you think it's fair for them to take over my room?" I demanded. She tried to calm me down, insisting it wasn't a big deal, but I had reached my limit. "I'm not giving them my room. If they don't move their things out, they'll need to find another place to stay." Eric must have overheard as he burst into the room, looking furious. "You're really going to kick us out when we have a baby on the way?" Jessica, who had been outside, walked in, drawn by the noise. "What's happening?" she asked. I laid it out for her. "What's happening is your husband is trying to take my room, and I'm telling you both it's not going to happen. Either stay in the guest room or leave." Jessica wasn't pleased. She tried to play the "we're family" card, but I didn't waver. I told them they had until the end of the day to clear their things out of my room, or I would do it myself. Jessica glared, but Eric stormed off, slamming the door. I headed back to my office, knowing this fight was far from over. After that blow-up, I thought maybe Jessica and Eric would finally back down. I couldn't have been clearer my room wasn't available. They could stay in the guest room or leave. It seemed simple enough, right? But of course it didn't go that smoothly. The next morning, the house was oddly quiet, too quiet. I stayed in my office for most of the day, not wanting to face more drama. When dinner time rolled around, I came out to grab a bite, and that's when things took another turn. I opened the fridge to find it nearly empty. I had just stocked up on groceries 2 days before, and now most of it was gone. The freezer was almost bare too. I knew my parents didn't eat that much, and it definitely wasn't me, so it had to be Jessica and Eric. They had helped themselves to everything without even asking. Already frustrated, I tried to let it go, thinking I'd just restock the next day. But it wasn't only the missing food that got to me. When I sat down at the table, my mom came into the kitchen, avoiding my gaze. She quietly prepared plates for herself, my dad, Jessica, and Eric, but she didn't make one for me. At first I thought it might have been an oversight, but then she finished serving everyone, sat down, and started eating. I was left staring at them, feeling like an outsider. I looked at my mom, struggling to keep my composure. "You didn't make me a plate?" I asked. She barely glanced up. "You don't want to help the family, you don't eat with the family," she replied, as if she were commenting on the weather. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me? I pay for everything here, the groceries, the mortgage, and now you're excluding me." My dad stayed silent, just sighed and kept eating as if this was normal. Jessica and Eric sat there with smug expressions, like they'd won some sort of power struggle. Eric even smirked at me as I walked by, and the passive-aggressive attitude nearly pushed me over the edge. I slammed the fridge door and stormed out of the kitchen. I wasn't going to let them treat me like an outsider in my own home, the house that I paid for. I went straight to my room, grabbed my laptop, and started looking up the process for serving eviction notices. Enough was enough. Within an hour, I had the paperwork ready. I printed 2 sets, one for Jessica and Eric and another for my parents. It felt strange evicting my own family, but they had crossed too many boundaries. They didn't respect me, and I wasn't going to let them continue walking all over me. Jessica's face went pale. She clearly hadn't seen this coming. "You can't be serious," she muttered. "Oh, I'm dead serious," I replied. "I'm done with this. You've been freeloading here without contributing anything, and now you think you can take over my house. Not anymore." Jessica stood up, glaring at me like she was ready to fight, but I didn't flinch. I'm taller, stronger, and not at all intimidated by her temper tantrum. "We're family," she insisted through clenched teeth. "You can't just throw us out." "Yes, I can," I responded, stepping closer. "I pay for this house, not you, not Eric, not Mom or Dad. If you can't respect me, you can't stay here." Eric, of course, started crying, playing the victim. "I'm pregnant, and you're kicking us out?" "What kind of sister are you?" he sobbed. "I'm the sister who's been footing the bill while you two take advantage of me," I shot back. "You have 24 hours, that's more than fair." Jessica looked like she wanted to argue, but I could see the reality sinking in. I wasn't bluffing. My mom, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "You can't do this, honey. They're your sister and brother-in-law. This is family," but I wasn't swayed. "It's already done," I replied, pointing to the eviction notice in her hands. "You have 30 days to find somewhere else too. If you're not out by then, I'll be taking legal action." The room fell into a stunned silence. My dad said nothing, just stared down at the table, looking lost. My mom looked like she was about to cry, but I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about being kind anymore, it was about standing up for myself and not letting them trample all over me. After a few tense minutes, I turned and walked back to my room, leaving them to process what had just happened. I locked my door, sat down at my desk, and took a deep breath. I had done something I never thought I'd have to do: evict my own family. But honestly, it felt right. I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me anymore. The house was eerily quiet for the rest of the night. No one came to my door, and no one tried to argue with me. I think they finally understood that I wasn't playing around. If they couldn't respect me, they couldn't live in my house. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Update 1: after serving the eviction notices, I expected either a huge blow-up or for everyone to finally take me seriously. But instead, the house fell silent, uncomfortably so. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, partly because I couldn't sleep, waiting for something to happen. Maybe Jessica would pound on my door, demanding I change my mind, or my parents would come pleading with me. But nothing of the sort happened. I got up, walked into the kitchen, and found the house completely empty: no Jessica, no Eric, no parents. For a moment I even wondered if they had packed up and left during the night. Wishful thinking, I guess. I made my coffee and sat at the table, waiting for anyone to say something, anything. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or explaining myself again. I had drawn my line and I wasn't backing down. They had pushed me too far, and I couldn't continue living like that. They didn't respect me, and they certainly didn't respect the fact that I was the one covering all the expenses. After some time, my mom came into the kitchen, looking like she hadn't slept much. At first, she didn't say anything. She just grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. The silence was heavy, like neither of us knew where to start. Eventually, she broke it. "Honey," she began, her voice soft and weary. "I know things have gotten out of control." I stayed silent, staring into my coffee, waiting for her to go on. I had a feeling an apology was coming, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten between you and your sister," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "We were just trying to help them, and I guess I didn't see how unfair it was to you." Her admission caught me off guard. I hadn't expected her to acknowledge it, at least not this soon. For a brief moment I thought maybe she finally understood that I wasn't the villain in this story. But I couldn't let go of the frustration from everything that had happened. "You didn't just ignore what I wanted," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "You sided with them every single time, like you just assumed I'd roll over and let them take whatever they wanted." She looked down at her coffee, staying quiet for a few seconds. "I know," she said softly, "but we thought. Well, you've always been the strong one. Jessica, she's never had it easy. That was always her excuse. Jessica wasn't strong. Jessica faced more challenges. Jessica needed extra support. It seemed like they believed I had no limits because I was the one with my life together." "And you think I've had it easy?" I asked, my frustration barely contained. "I'm the one who bought this house. I pay the mortgage. I buy the groceries. I've been supporting all of you, and you think I can just keep doing this forever?" She sighed and nodded. "You're right. You've done far more than we could have asked for. But Jessica, with the baby coming, I cut her off. This isn't about the baby, it's about respect, and none of you have shown me any." She sighed again, looking worn out. "We thought we were doing the right thing," she finally said. "Jessica and Eric, they don't have much. And whose fault is that I shot back? I didn't ask them to move in. I didn't ask for any of this. They need to get their lives together, and you can't keep bailing them out at my expense." She nodded, finally seeming to understand, or at least trying to. "We'll figure something out," she said, her voice much quieter now, "but please don't push us out, not like this." I leaned back, trying to regain my composure. I didn't want to force my parents out. They were my family. But I couldn't keep living under these conditions either. Things had to change, or they would have to leave. "I don't want to push you out," I said as calmly as possible, "but things need to change. I can't keep living like this, being treated like I don't matter in my own home." She didn't argue, just nodded quietly. "Okay," she said. "We'll figure something out after that." She left the kitchen, and I was alone with my thoughts again. I wasn't sure if anything would truly change, but at least it seemed like they were starting to take me seriously. Later that afternoon, Jessica finally appeared, looking like she had been stewing in her anger all day. She didn't say hello or anything when she walked into the living room. She just plopped down across from me, with the same angry expression she'd had since I handed her the eviction notice. I didn't bother to acknowledge her either, keeping my attention on my phone. "So, this is how it's going to be," she spat out, her voice full of bitterness. "You're really going to kick us out?" I barely looked up. "I gave you 24 hours. If you're still here tomorrow, I'm calling the police." Jessica scoffed, shaking her head like I was the one being unreasonable. "We're family. You don't do this to family." I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair. "Yeah, well, family doesn't take advantage of each other either. You've been freeloading here for weeks without contributing, and now you think you can just take over my house. I'm not your fallback plan, Jessica." She didn't have much to say after that. She sat there for a minute, clearly wanting to argue, but there was nothing left to discuss. I had set my terms, and she knew I wasn't bluffing. After a few more moments of tense silence, Jessica got up, muttering under her breath, and stormed off again. Typical Jessica, always running away when things didn't go her way. The rest of the day was quiet, almost too quiet. I had no idea what Jessica and Eric were going to do, but I wasn't about to change my mind. I had given them more than enough time to get themselves together, and they had done nothing but take advantage of my generosity. The next 24 hours would determine everything. Update 2: on the morning of their eviction deadline, I woke up early again. I knew this was the day either Jessica and Eric would pack up and leave, or I'd have to take legal action. Strangely, I didn't feel angry anymore. I wasn't even anxious. I had accepted what needed to be done, and now it was just a matter of seeing it through. I got up, went to the kitchen, and the house was still eerily quiet. It felt different, almost like the calm before a storm. I made myself some breakfast, though the fridge was still pretty empty after Jessica and Eric's last raid on the groceries. I managed to scrounge up enough for a decent meal, and as I sat there eating, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly everything had fallen apart. Just a few months ago, things were fine. My parents and I had a good arrangement. I worked, paid the bills, and life was smooth. Then Jessica and Eric arrived, and everything went downhill. It's crazy how fast things can change when people start feeling entitled to what they didn't earn. A couple of hours later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My dad walked into the kitchen, grabbed a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table across from me. He didn't speak right away, just sipped his coffee and looked out the window. I couldn't tell if he was angry with me or if he simply didn't know what to say. Finally, he broke the silence. "Jessica and Eric are leaving today," he said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. A part of me felt bad, but a larger part knew this was the right thing to do. I couldn't keep letting them take advantage of me, and if it meant they had to leave, then so be it. "They don't have anywhere to go," my dad added, his voice low. "They're going to stay at a motel for a while, until they figure things out." I paused mid-bite, looking at him. A twinge of guilt crossed my mind, but I quickly pushed it away. I had given them plenty of time to get their act together, and they hadn't done anything to help themselves. "I gave them a chance," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "They left me no choice." My dad didn't argue or try to guilt-trip me like I expected. Instead, he simply nodded, taking another sip of his coffee. It seemed he finally realized that I wasn't going to back down this time. After everything that had happened, there was no way things could return to how they were before. Around midday, Jessica and Eric began packing their belongings. I stayed in my room for most of it, avoiding another confrontation or having to hear more passive-aggressive remarks. But after a while, I could hear Jessica's voice rising from down the hall, and I knew trouble was brewing. Sure enough, Jessica knocked on my door. When I opened it, she stood there with the same angry expression she'd worn throughout this ordeal. "You're really going to let this happen?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "You're just going to kick us out like this?" I crossed my arms and leaned against the door frame. "I gave you 24 hours. You knew what needed to happen." Jessica clenched her jaw, clearly struggling to keep her temper in check. "We're family. You don't do this to family," she shot back. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Family doesn't take advantage of each other. I'm not kicking you out without a reason. You've been living here for weeks without contributing a thing. I've covered the mortgage, the groceries, everything. And instead of appreciating that, you tried to take over my room and push me out of my own home. I'm not going to let that happen." Jessica stayed silent for a moment, her frustration evident, but she had nothing left to argue. Deep down, she knew I was right, even if she didn't want to admit it. "So that's it," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're just throwing us out." I'm giving you the same option as yesterday, I replied. You can find a new place to live, or you can stay in the guest room and respect my space. But if you can't do that, then yes, you're leaving? Jessica glared at me for a few more seconds before turning and walking away without another word. I closed the door and let out a long breath. This entire situation had been draining, but I knew it had to be done. By mid-afternoon, Jessica and Eric were gone. I didn't see them leave, and honestly, I didn't want to. There was no need for an emotional farewell. They packed up their things, loaded the car, and drove off without saying goodbye. The house felt different after they left, quieter, less tense. My parents didn't have much to say to me for the rest of the day. I think they were still trying to process everything that had happened. My mom looked upset, but she kept her thoughts to herself. Maybe she was starting to realize that I wasn't the one who caused all this. Jessica and Eric had pushed too far, and this was the result. That evening, my mom knocked on my door. She came in, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the floor for a long time, as if searching for the right words. "They're gone," she said softly. I nodded, not responding. "I never thought it would come to this," she admitted. "I didn't realize how much pressure we were putting on you." I looked at her, feeling a bit of my frustration easing. "It's not that I didn't want to help," I explained, trying to convey my side of things, "but you all treated me like I didn't matter, like my needs and my space weren't important." She sighed, nodding slowly. "You're right. We should have seen it sooner." We sat together in silence for a few minutes, both of us unsure of what to say next. I could see that she was upset, but at least now she seemed to understand where I was coming from. "I don't want you and Dad to leave," I said after a while, breaking the silence. "But if things don't change, I can't live like this." She nodded again and stood up slowly. "We'll figure it out," she promised. "Things will be different." I swear as she left the room I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The situation with Jessica and Eric was finally over, but I knew there was still work to do with my parents. It wasn't going to be easy, but at least now it seemed like they were ready to listen. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could truly breathe again. With Jessica and Eric gone, the house settled into an eerie calm. I could finally take a deep breath, but the weight of the entire situation still lingered in my mind. I had fought for my room and my respect, but it left me wondering if things would ever really return to normal with my parents. I had drawn a hard line, and there was no going back from that. Still, I hoped we could find a way forward without all the tension. The following days were quiet, almost too quiet. My parents kept mostly to themselves. My mom would sometimes make polite conversation, but we avoided talking about what had happened. My dad, always the more reserved one, seemed to steer clear of any potential conflicts. I wasn't sure if they were trying to give me space or if they were still processing everything that had unfolded. Either way, I didn't mind the silence. I spent most of my time in my home office, immersing myself in work to keep my mind off everything. The office had become my refuge, my escape from all the chaos of the past few weeks, but occasionally my thoughts would drift back to how things had unfolded. I couldn't help but feel a bit of regret about how it had all blown up, but I also knew I had made the right decision. I had been taken for granted for too long, and something had to change. About a week after Jessica and Eric left, my mom came into my office while I was working. I could tell from how she hesitated at the door that she had something on her mind. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I nodded, saving my work and turning to face her. "What's up?" She stepped into the room, wringing her hands nervously. "I've been thinking about everything about Jessica, Eric, and how we've treated you." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. It seemed like she needed to get this off her chest. "I just wanted to say we never meant to make you feel like you didn't matter," she said, her voice wavering. "We thought we were helping Jessica, but I see now that we put too much on you. You've done so much for us, more than we could ever have asked for, and we took advantage of that. I'm sorry." Her apology caught me off guard. I had expected some kind of acknowledgement eventually, but hearing her say it so directly hit harder than I had anticipated. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time in a long while I felt like she truly understood what I had been going through. "I appreciate that, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But it wasn't just about the money or the house, it was about respect. I felt like you all didn't value me or the effort I was putting in to keep everything running smoothly. I didn't mind helping, but I couldn't continue living like that. She nodded, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. "You're right. We should have respected your boundaries." It won't happen again. I wasn't one for lengthy emotional talks, but this one felt important. It was like a weight had been lifted, and I could finally see a way forward without the constant strain and frustration. My mom offered a small, apologetic smile before heading back to the kitchen. I sat there for a while, processing our conversation. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step towards something better. The real turning point came a few weeks later. By then, the house had settled into a new routine. My parents were more mindful of my space, and the lingering tension that had filled every corner since Jessica and Eric left had gradually faded. The house started to feel like a home again instead of the battleground it had become over the past months. One evening, I came back from a meeting at the office to find my dad sitting at the kitchen table, looking unusually serious. Normally, he wasn't one for deep conversations. That was more my mom's territory, but the way he sat, staring into his coffee, made it clear he had something on his mind. "Hey," I said, trying to keep things light as I grabbed a drink from the fridge. "Everything okay?" He looked up, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meaning to talk to you." I took a seat across from him, curious but not too anxious. He took a deep breath, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. "About the house and everything you've done to keep things going." I stayed quiet, sensing he needed to say his piece. "I know I haven't said much," he started, his voice low, "but I've been thinking a lot about it. You've done more for this family than any of us ever expected, and I want you to know I appreciate it." I was caught off guard. My dad wasn't usually this open, so hearing him say those words felt important. "You didn't ask for any of this," he continued, "and you've taken on more than your fair share. I just want you to know that I see that, and I'm sorry for how things went with Jessica and Eric." I could tell he had been carrying this for some time, and hearing him acknowledge what I'd been through hit me differently than my mom's apology. It wasn't that one meant more than the other, but my dad's quiet nature made his words feel deeper, somehow. "Thanks, Dad," I said, unsure of what else to add. "That means a lot." He nodded, taking another sip of coffee. "I just want things to be better for all of us." It wasn't a long conversation, but it was enough. I could see that he meant it, and in that moment I felt like things were truly starting to improve. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere continued to lighten. My parents and I found a new rhythm, one where I didn't feel like I was carrying the burden of the household alone. They began helping out more, chipping in with groceries, cleaning, and respecting my personal space. It wasn't perfect, but it was a significant improvement from where we had been. As for Jessica and Eric, I didn't hear much from them after they left. My mom mentioned that they were staying in a motel temporarily and looking for their own place. I didn't ask for more details. I had set my boundaries, and as much as I cared about my sister, she needed to learn how to manage on her own. If that meant keeping some distance for a while, then so be it. About a month after everything happened, I received a text from Jessica. It was short and direct, not like her usual style, but it seemed genuine. "Hey, I know things got messed up. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how everything went down. We're figuring things out, and I hope we can talk soon." I stared at the message for a while, unsure of how to respond. Part of me was still upset about how things had unfolded, but another part appreciated the gesture. I didn't respond right away. I needed some time to think. That evening, I sat down and composed a reply, trying to keep it straightforward but clear about my feelings. "Thanks for reaching out. I'm glad you guys are working things out. I hope we can talk soon too, but I need a bit of time. Let's catch up when we're both ready." I hit send and felt a strange sense of closure. Things weren't perfect, and I wasn't expecting them to be, but at least we had opened up a line of communication again. That was more than I could have hoped for a few weeks before. As time passed, I found myself feeling more at peace with everything. The house was no longer filled with tension, and my parents were finally respecting my boundaries. I had regained my space, and most importantly, I had regained control over my own life. It hadn't been easy to get to this point. Standing up for myself, especially against family, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But in the end, it was worth it. I learned a valuable lesson: respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you have to earn, even with your own family. And I had earned mine. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't give in. It would have been easier to just let Jessica and Eric take over my room, to let my parents continue treating me like I was just another guest in my own home. But that wasn't the life I wanted. I wanted my own space and my sense of dignity, and now I finally had it. Maybe one day things with Jessica and Eric will be different. Maybe we'll find our way back to being close like we were before all the drama. But for now, I'm focused on living my life the way I need to, and for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.